Yeah, funny thing about money is that it's got a certain feel to it, doesn't it? Part of that's the cotton that they print with it. It's hardly actually not even any real paper in here at all. But you know, they've got all sorts of different watermarks and things in there. And if you ever try to scan money, in fact, every scanner won't actually do it. And Photoshop even has technology embedded within it to detect when you've got money in a Photoshop document, because then it just sort of shuts itself down and I assume probably calls somebody, whoever they call for that. But what if we could, I don't know, sort of figure out how to make texture of like the engraving that it has on the paper, and what if we could figure out a way to choose who you wanted to put on the money? Wouldn't that be interesting? Interesting. Now, the thing about texture is that when we talk about it, we think about how things feel, like cash. It has a certain texture to it that is very distinctive to us, but so too does lots of other things like curtains or the tops of Legos or towels or any number of other things. When we talk about texture in design, that can be lots of different things. It can even be something as simple as color, gradients, or a kind of texture. It can be having depth that appears from having multiple layers of things that are stacked in sort of a perspective. So if you imagine like a concert, for example, maybe you've got the hands of people that are in the front that are sort of blurry but relatively close to you and one color, and then off in the distance you have a different shade of people who are further ahead, closer to the stage, and then you've got the stage itself with the performers on it, and all those things sort of add together to create a texture. There's also just the general texture that I've seen some of you use already in several assignments, which are things like adding paper, for example, and then paper has an obvious texture to it, or adding any number of other like design elements that come from like a stock photo, things like grunge elements and things, which we're going to use one of those here in a minute. But there's a lot of advanced techniques that we can use that we can actually create our own textures in things without having to rely on stock. And I will say that relying on stock is an excellent way to sort of speed up the process. But I want to show you several things today that make use of a lot of tools in Photoshop that might give you some inspiration for some ways to use things in other projects as we go through the semester. So let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with a new canvas, and we're actually going to make one that seems sort of impossibly small. 10 pixels by 10 pixels. Now trust me on this one, we will get there. But 10 by 10, 72 DPI is fine, but we're going to change the color mode to grayscale. That's important here for reasons that you'll see in a minute. And we're going to make sure the background contents of this are set to white. 8-bit is fine. We're going to create that, and it's going to be teeny. Depending on the size of your monitor, it could be a slightly bit larger, but on my monitor, it's teeny. So Command 0, and we'll zoom all the way into that. Now, you'll notice that at 10 by 10, it's showing us this little square, but you'll notice that off to the side, it actually gives some guides here because we are zoomed at 128,000% on this little teeny 10 by 10. So what are we going to do from here? So what I want to do is I'm going to grab the marquee tools. I'm going to hit the letter M on the keyboard, and I'm going to drag a selection that's kind of around the top half, and because I can very visually see that, it's right there. So once I have the marquee tool selected on the top half, I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and then I want to go to Invert. It's going to turn this black, which is the inverse of the white that it's on. And then we're going to go to Select or Deselect, or you can just hit Command D for the shortcut there. And then we're going to apply a filter. We're going to go to Filter, we're going to go to Blur, and then we're going to use a box blur, and we're going to set this to just 4 pixels. And it's going to give us this little gradient map that we've got going on here. Now, once we have that, we've got ourselves the basis for our texture. With this, we're going to go to the Edit menu, and then we're going to go to Define Pattern. And I don't actually really necessarily need to name this. In fact, I've already done this, so I'm not going to hit this, but you can give it a name if you want. Pattern 1 is probably what you will see here, and just hit OK. This is going to get a little wild here, and there's going to be a lot of little steps in here, so you may need to pause the video, but I'm going to try and go slow. But if you keep up with me on this, I think you'll find the results are kind of interesting. Now that you have this pattern defined, we need to create a new Photoshop document, and we're going to make it a lot larger this time. We're going to make it 6,000 pixels by 6,000 pixels. Now we're going to continue to make this grayscale, which will help keep the file size of this thing down. The resolution at 72 dpi is fine, and the background contents can remain as white. So once we create this, now we have a much larger thing. Here we are at 33%. Now what I want to do is I want to use the pattern that we just defined. So if I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and then the contents are going to be a pattern, and then the custom pattern is the one that you just created down here. It should be the very first thing. There are some others that are already built into Photoshop, including trees, grass, and water, and you can also load in your own if you find any from the internet that you might like to try sometime. So with that one defined, we're going to let the blending mode stay as normal and the opacity at 100, and we're going to hit OK. And once you do that, it's going to kind of make this sort of repeating pattern across the whole canvas, all 6,000 by 6,000 of it. When you zoom out, it's going to look a bit like this, but stick with me on this. From here, we're going to do Filter, we're going to go to Distort, and we're going to go to Waves. Or wave, I should say. Now, the numbers here are important. So the number of generators are going to be set to 1. The wavelength on this is going to be 149 and 150. The reason for that is because it's proportional. The amplitude is 49 and 50, again, proportional on the X and Y axis for what it's about to do. And then scale is going to be 49 by 100, or excuse me, 49 by 50, like this. And then they're going to leave the type as sine, and then the repeat edge pixels is also fine. So once you do that, you're going to hit OK. And it's going to give you this background that's all nice and kind of uniquely wavy. And if you stare at it for too long, it might make your brain melt. But it also looks kind of like a postage stamp on the top and the bottom. From here, we are going to either do Command A or Edit, Select All. And then you are going to copy, so Command C on a Mac, Control C on a PC. And then we are going to create a new solid color layer. So down here in the bottom right, next to your effects panels and whatnot, you're going to click on this one that's got the little half circle where it says Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer, and we're going to make a new solid color. We're going to set the layer to be 50% gray. Remember, this whole document is in grayscale, so it won't show color as it currently is. So from here, we've got 0, 0, 50%. That's also 128, 128, and 128 on an RGB scale, or kind of about the perfect midway point over here on the very far left. Once you have done that, go ahead and hit OK. And we need to be on this mask layer. Now, we haven't talked a whole lot about masks in this class yet, but you're going to start seeing some more of them. Some of you have actually already been using them, which is great. Masks are an excellent way of sort of preserving the original components of a layer without actually erasing it. So a lot of times when we put two things on top of each other, we erase the parts of the one on top that we don't want. But if you ever want to bring parts of those back, you can't do it because you've erased it. It's a destructive edit. Masks are a way to do a non-destructive reveal or erase or brush in of whatever is sort of above or beneath it. So I want to hit the Option key and I want to click on the actual white square here. This will actually let me look at the mask, and then I'm going to paste in our funky little waves that we've got going on over here. Now, once I've done this, I need to go back and I want to do Command T for a free transform here, or you can right click when you've done that, and you're going to rotate this 90 degrees clockwise. And so it's going to tilt that 90 degrees clockwise. And then we are going to set, once we've done that, go ahead and click on the layer itself, not the mask, but the actual left-hand icon of the layer over here, and set the opacity on this to 90%. And part of the reason why that will come in handy is in just a second. And then from here, we're going to merge these layers. What we're going to do is we don't need the background layer anymore, and we don't need the top layer. We're just going to merge it all together. Command E is the quick way to do that. And what it does is it sort of flattens this whole thing. That shortcut, by the way, is awfully close to S. Just to keep that in mind. Not that any of you have emailed me and mentioned that you've sort of accidentally flattened all of your layers and saved your files because Command S or Control S and Command E and Control E, that S and that E are pretty close. So be careful, because Command E is a very destructive edit, and if you do Command E and then also kind of hit S or maybe hit it afterwards, you'll have saved your Photoshop document with no layers, and that would be bad. Not that it's happened to anybody or me. So now that we've got our merged layer in here, we sort of merged this down. We're going to do one more filter. We're going to go to Filter. We are going to, where is it in here? It's in Distort and then Ripple. And we're going to set this to size large 15%. Okay. Once we do that, it will have created what looks like these little bulbous, I don't know, they look kind of like little onions to me, sort of dancing around in there. But now we've got our selection all selected around it. The layers are merged down. We've got a 6,000 by 6,000 grid of what is about to be the texture for the next part of this. For the next steps, we're going to need some of the files that you can download from Canvas if you're following along. You're going to need the grunge texture, and you're also going to need the picture of our subject. With this still active, though, before we come out of here, go ahead and make sure that you've got sort of a Command A and then a Command C to copy this. And then from here, we need to go into the Finder, and we need to find our smiling man. And we're going to open him up. You know what? The guy looks kind of familiar. I feel like I've seen this man around the internet before. Anyway, once you've got this fella in here, we actually need this to be grayscale. So Command-Shift-U is the quick shortcut for that. There's also under Image Adjustments, Desaturate. But basically what that does is it just desaturates the image, takes all the color out. We're going to need that because it's going to help bring out some more of the textures that we need. So, and once we've done this, we can Command V to paste the texture in. It's going to be big. And then I'm going to rename this layer to, I'm going to call it engraving, just so I can refer to it as something other than layer 2. And then the trick here is to set the blend mode on this to a hard mix. Now, when you look at that, you're going to be like, Justin, that doesn't look very good at all. But we're not done yet. So we need to select the layer with the man on it, so in this case layer 1, and we need to add some more filters, and we can do this by sort of going to Filter, Stylize, Oil Paint of all things. This is one that does not often get used. If you take a look at it in the preview window here, you can see that it really smooths out the texture, right? It makes it look a lot more like an oil painting. I'm maxing out all of these. So set your stylization, your cleanliness, your scale, and your bristle details to 10, and then turn off the lighting checkbox, because usually that's on by default. And then once you have done that, go ahead and hit OK. And what we need is we actually need to add more, but I don't want to add too much to this because it'll start to blur out some of the details that we need. We need to bring those back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command J to duplicate that layer. So in this case, now it's going to be layer 1 copy. And I'm going to go to Filter, Oil Paint, and you can just kind of keep hitting this, or you can go do the Control Command F function probably about 8 to 10 times here. And every time you do this, you're going to notice that it's going to get a lot blurrier. In fact, it gets so blurry that if you do it too many times, this actually could be a useful place to do a mask. I'm not doing a mask here because I know what I'm going to be doing next, and so I know that I don't need one, but you could opt to do one here. The way that this is going to work is as you've done this about 8 to 10 times, if you toggle this on and off, you can see that it makes for a much sort of blurrier, mushy looking face there. With the top layer selected, this is the one that's been oil painted about 8 to 10 times, I'm just going to grab the eraser brush, nice soft, and I'm going to bring back the eyes a little bit on the nostrils and the teeth and then around the chin. You can also kind of do it maybe around the top of his hairline and the shirt line there. And you might think to yourself, well, now why those spots? And it's like, well, it's because as human beings, we all kind of gravitate towards eyes, mouth, and sort of defining features. And so the contrast of things there around a person's chin and their mouth and their cheeks, the tops of their head, those things give a lot of definition. And I think you'll agree that it now looks a little like you can't tell or care that much that his shirt is less detailed than what it once was, or that his hair or even his ears or his cheeks. But we tend to care a lot about eyes, nose, mouth, those definitive facial features. Now, once we have that top layer erased in such a way that we've brought back those details, we're going to come into our engraving layer, and we're going to Command T and zoom out a little bit, and you'll see that we've actually, remember, because this was a 6,000 pixel wide thing, it's probably larger than your initial canvas, and you can sort of size this down and come back in here. And depending on the scale at which you look at it, you can find that there is more or less detail, but yeah, it's starting to look a little bit more like money there, I think. So holding the Option key, you can scroll back out. I also tend to kind of like to rotate this from time to time, something about like this, and see what it looks like. I'm just going to rotate it and leave it like that. I'm going to hit Enter, and I'm going to leave it like that. But there's more that we can do here. We can create a levels adjustment. So down here with the little half circle, click on that, go to a levels adjustment, bring that down beneath the engraving layer, and if you grab these little sliders here, you can see that it's going to do a bunch of different things. I like to punch the white down a little bit. I like to pump up the black output, and most of the effects that you're going to get are here in the gray. Go too far and it's just too much, right? But I don't know, a little bit up what we want to do is we want to bring back some of the details, because as it was, it's pretty washed out around like where his hair met his forehead. But if we add in some more of this gray, it sort of brings back his face. You can see more of his beard a little bit in there, and sort of maintains a lot of those details, because if we zoom in, you'll see that we still have kind of this interesting halftone print look, even on the dark parts, of his eyes. Make sure that you have selected the actual levels here and not the mask, okay? So once you bring this down, you'll notice that starts to adjust some things. I find that about 83% there looks kind of nice. It brings back more of the shadow and depth and sort of the wrinkles of his face, particularly around his right cheek there. Now it's looking a little bit more like money, but money actually has a little bit of color to it, particularly the new ones. The really old ones were a lot more green, but the new ones, they have actual, bits of kind of greens and browns, and there's a certain money color to things. Let's see if we can't figure out how to bring some of that in. There are, of course, lots of different ways that we can bring in color into an image like this, even though it's all been black and white so far. Now you'll notice that our smiling man image up here is at an RGB format. So this image, unlike the others that we've been working in and have been creating, can actually support color. And one way that we can do this is, again, come down here to your adjustment layers, click on that, and do a gradient map. And then once you've got the gradient map in there, you can double click on this layer right here. And once you click in this gradient map selection, it'll bring up the stops and the gradient editor. And there's usually some pre-made ones in here, but if you come in and, I don't know, start to pluck out different shades of something, maybe try to find a nice little mutish green and change the white to, I don't know, something kind of brownish. Play around with this for a bit and see where you land up. There we go. I think I like the idea what it comes up to the hex value of E9DDCB, or that's 361391 on the HSB scale there. For the whites became that, and then on the green over here, I ended up with 3A6155. That's 162, 40, 38% on the HSB scale. So click OK on that, and now we've added in a little bit of color to this, and it's starting to look a little bit more like money, isn't it? But we still need to do a little bit something extra here, and so there is a grunge texture that you can download from Canvas, and you can plop that on the top, and when you do, you can size it up to fit. This will be right on top. Hit enter. And then we can set this blend mode on this to be screen. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Now, it's important that the grunge layer goes on the very top and that the engraving goes under that. You can play around a little bit and see if moving these gradient maps in ways changes things, because if you've got the gradient map underneath the grunge layer, or even above it, the colors will change a little bit, and you can sort of play around with what those look like. I quite like it a little bit on top, but it's also kind of nice right there. So you can decide quite how you'd like it to be, depending on how bright, I suppose, you would like your subject to be. Depending on the photo that you're using, this may also differ a lot more, perhaps if you're using a photograph of yourself, for instance. There are some other things that we can do here. So if you go take the layer 1, this is just of the original image of the guy, and grab an effect, you could add an outer glow, for example, that could be pretty broad. Change the spreads a little bit here and see what you get. Something sort of subtle, not a whole lot there. I kind of like that. That works. And then we can do one more thing. We can create some sunburst rays around him, so that way we can create some more interesting texture. And here's how we do it. And yes, before we begin, I'm very well aware that what we're about to make can be readily found on virtually any stock image place anywhere on the internet for free. These little sunburst rays, they look very reminiscent of sort of the rising sun, like of the Japanese flag. They've kind of had their moment in the sun a few years ago. They were very trendy, probably, I don't know, 10 years ago. But they're still around, but I like to make my own sometimes, and so that's what we're going to do, because now you can see how easy it is. Let's go make another new image here, file new, and let's make this one, I don't know, 2000 by 2000. What's important is that it's in color, and then that you can also fill this one with white as well. Grayscale is also fine for this, and then you can go ahead and create that image. Unlock the layer, so that way your background layer is unlocked, and you're going to go into the filter layer, and you're going to go to the filter gallery. And then once this opens, there's going to be a bunch of different options in here. The one that we're after is the halftone pattern, and that's under sketch, halftone pattern. You can kind of click through them and you can see all sorts of different effects in here. These also add texture in interesting ways. But for my purposes, halftone pattern is going to create these nice black and white stripes. If you set the size and the contrast to 12 and 50, pattern type of line. Once you do that, go ahead and hit OK. And then Command T to transform, come out on the sides. Hold the Shift key while you do this and rotate it 90 degrees. Again, you can also right click it and do rotate 90 degrees clockwise. And then we're going to go to Filter. Excuse me, I'm going to hit Enter first. And then we're going to go to Filter, Distort, and then we're going to go to the polar coordinates. And we're going to set this to rectangular to polar. You can also try polar to rectangular, and you see that you get sort of a rising texture to it. But rectangular to polar, and look at that. We've got ourselves some sunburst rays. So now what do I do? Well, I can just pick up this whole little layer, drag it over here to my smiling man, which is a little terrifying where it falls in there, but if you put it down at the very bottom, Command T, size them up. You can even oversize them and sort of stick them off to the side here, depending on what your subject's position is. Something about like that. That's a bit much, I think, but if you drop the opacity or change the fill, you get some different effects in here. I kind of like something like this. You could also tinker with the blend modes. Dissolve is kind of nice because it makes it kind of have an interesting texture back there. But I don't know, that might be a little much. But so dropping the fill can change that a little bit. I don't know, 69% and 67% on the opacity and the fill. Looks pretty interesting. I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Maybe we should take Andrew Jackson off the 20 and replace it with this guy. Anyway, we'll put that in, and hopefully nobody notices that we're creating alternative money here. But that's introduction to some texture. We covered a lot in this in a relatively short amount of time. Your assignment this week is to experiment with some texture. I've given you some prompts because I kind of want you to think within the confines of some restraints this week. And also want to make sure that there's some equity in terms of the options that people have for some of this. So this week, your assignment will be to use texture in some interesting ways to create some exciting environments for some figures and toys. If you have any questions, by all means, reach out. But happy photoshopping, and yell if you need anything.